The first time I ever got a glimpse of him was the third night I was staying at this dingy little hotel. It's one of those places you find off the highway, the type of place that advertises truck stop and motel. But it's really only the motel part that's open. The parking lot is full of what seems to be permanent residents in various stages of disrepair, and the office staff are either completely checked out or high on something. It was definitely not the kind of place you'd expect to find anything exciting happening. It was also not the kind of place you'd expect to find a serial killer stalking his next victim. But then again, I suppose you don't usually find serial killers doing anything you'd expect. I should probably mention that neither of us did. It was just after midnight, and I was lying in bed watching TV when I caught my first glimpse of him. It was just a fleeting impression of a man standing directly behind me by the window, so I turned to look, but of course, there was nothing there. The bed was pushed up against the wall, and the only other things in the room were a TV, a small table, a sink area with a leaky faucet, and a door leading to the bathroom. There was no closet, and certainly nothing by the window. I didn't think much of it. I just put it down to my overactive imagination, brought on by the flickering neon light of the sign outside my window, which spelled out vacancies in a mesmerizing strobe effect. I lay back down and tried to watch TV, but the rest of the show didn't stick in my mind. Okay, all I could see was the man standing by the window. Was he watching me? I couldn't help but glance back at the window every few seconds, half expecting to see a face peering through the glass, but each time I looked, all I saw was my own reflection, along with the equally creepy reflection of the TV, for the rest of the night. Sleep evaded me, and I spent most of my time listening to the dripping faucet and watching the clock count the minutes until checkout. The following evening, the same thing happened. I was lying in bed watching TV when I felt his presence again. I turned and saw him standing right beside me. I screamed, and he vanished. I told myself it was just some trick of the light, or maybe a figment of my imagination. I needed to get out of there. As soon as I could, I packed up and left the hotel, vowing never to stay there again. But the next night, I was back on the road, and the same old nagging feeling of loneliness pulled at me. And so I called the hotel. To my surprise, they had a vacancy. When I got there, I asked the clerk if he'd had any reports of strange activity, specifically a man standing by the window. He looked at me for a moment. "There aren't any windows in that room," he said. I froze. Why hadn't I noticed that the previous 2 nights? In fact, why couldn't I remember anything about the room at all? Was I going crazy? The clerk seemed to sense my unease. "Listen," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "If you don't want to stay there, you can have another room. No extra charge." I thanked him, but I decided to keep the original room. After all, how bad could it be? That night, I lay in bed, trying to calm my racing heart. I told myself it was just nerves, that there was nothing to be afraid of. Suddenly, I felt his icy breath on my neck and heard his raspy voice in my ear. "You took my room." I shot up in bed and stared at the wall where the window should have been. Then he stepped out from behind the flimsy curtain, his eyes glowing with an unearthly light. Adrenaline surged through me, and I scrambled out of bed. Smashing the mirror with a heavy bedside lamp, I raced for the door, his heart pounding in my chest. I burst through it and sprinted down the hallway, desperate to escape the phantom killer who haunted the mirrorless room. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I reached the relative safety of the lobby. Panting, I turned to the clerk and stammered, "That room? The mirror? It was right behind me." I could see him in the mirror, and he was coming out. The clerk nodded slowly, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Yes, sir. He often does that." "I'm sorry about that." He paused, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "But that room hasn't had a mirror in 10 years. 10 years. How many people had stayed in that room in the past decade? How many had seen the man in the mirror, or perhaps become his victims?" A chill ran down my spine. The room might not have had a mirror, but I knew what I had seen. I just hoped I'd never have to stay in that room again. But if you do you want to forget to smash the like button and subscribe, because the creepiest part of this story is you won't over yet.